I've grown over 250 tomato plants, and I almost quit. Because of 5 mistakes I had no idea I was making. Look, if you've ever wrapped up a season staring at sick, flower-dropping, battered little plants with zero idea what went wrong, you're in exactly the right place. Tomatoes are the most popular backyard vegetable in America. And honestly, they're also the one that breaks the most gardeners. And here's the thing. It's not bad luck. It's not bad soil. And it is definitely not you. It's 5 specific, fixable mistakes that almost nobody talks about straight. So let's go through all 5 of them right now. The first mistake sounds almost too simple to matter, but skip it and you're basically rolling out a welcome mat for every disease your garden has ever seen. Here's the deal. The leaves at the very base of your tomato plant already did their job. They pushed through the soil when the seed germinated, gave the plant the photosynthesis it needed to grow tall. And now they're done. Not just useless, actively harmful. Every time you water or rain falls, soil splashes up from the ground and drops pathogens right onto the undersides of those lowest leaves. And that is where most tomato disease starts, every single time. So strip everything below that first flower cluster. Doesn't matter if you're growing indeterminate, determinate or dwarf, pull those leaves. It takes 60 seconds and it can honestly save your whole season. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky. And this is the part most people flat out don't know. If you're deep planting your tomato to encourage extra roots along the buried stem, which is genuinely one of the best things you can do for the plant, you'll want to remove those lower branches before transplanting. Not on transplant day though, a few days before, because every cut you make leaves an open wound on the stem. And if that wound is still fresh, when you push the plant into the ground, you've just handed soilborne disease a direct entry point into the plant's vascular system. Give those cuts a few days to callous over. That short healing window is the difference between a plant that goes in clean and one that picks up an infection before it ever really gets going. All right, so your plant goes in healthy, but here's the thing. A clean stem and healthy leaves mean absolutely nothing. If the plant is quietly starving from the ground up all season long, and honestly, way more gardeners are doing this than you'd think. Tomato plants are feeding hogs. That's the most important thing to wrap your head around. Your vegetable garden is not a self-sustaining system. A forest can feed itself. Canopy trees drop leaves, bark falls, everything breaks down and feeds the soil continuously all year long. Your garden just takes. It doesn't give anything back. And if you're not actively replacing what the plants pull out, the soil depletes faster than you'd ever expect. Look, you need to fertilize your tomatoes at least once every 2 weeks throughout the entire season. I know that surprises almost everybody the first time they hear it, but that's just the reality of what tomatoes actually demand. Here's the routine that works. Start with a granular, organic, all-purpose fertilizer near a balanced 5-5-5 NPK ratio. This is your foundation, and I mean that seriously. Do not skip it. Granular organic fertilizers don't just feed the plant, they feed the soil microbiome, the bacteria, the fungi, all that underground life that makes nutrients actually available to the roots over time. Layer on organic bone meal. It's an excellent source of phosphorus for flowering and fruiting, and calcium to prevent blossom end rot on your fruits. Then water everything in with fish fertilizer, which delivers a broad mix of nutrients the plant can take up quickly. Every 2 weeks, 1.5 tablespoons of the granular, half a tablespoon of bone meal, 2 to 3 tablespoons of fish fertilizer per gallon of water. If you need to cut costs somewhere, swap the fish fertilizer for a synthetic water-soluble product. Totally fine. But keep the granular organic no matter what. That is the layer that feeds your soil long term. Everything else is just support. Okay, now for the one that drives me a little crazy. Because the internet has basically turned this into a religion. And it's quietly costing gardeners hundreds of tomatoes per season. Suckers are not your enemy. I really need you to hear that. That shoot forming at a 45-degree angle off the main stem, that is not a problem to eliminate. That is a future main stem. Let it grow and it will produce its own leaf nodes, flower clusters and fruit. The more suckers you allow to grow, the more stems your plant develops and the more tomatoes you get. That's not a theory, that's just how the plant is built. And yet the internet has convinced an entire generation of home gardeners to robotically pinch off every single sucker they see, believing it increases yield. It does the exact opposite. The single stem method, stripping every sucker to run one tall vertical leader, comes straight from commercial greenhouse growing. In a greenhouse, plants are packed 8 to 12 inches apart. Strings run 16 to 20 feet up to the ceiling, and vertical density is the entire point. Great system for that specific controlled environment, but your backyard is not a greenhouse. Outdoors, your plants top out around 6 to 8 feet before they become impossible to manage. In that setup, single stemming takes away the lateral branching where most of your fruit production actually happens. You think you're being disciplined, you're actually leaving tomatoes on the table. Let your plants branch out to whatever your support structure can handle. Remove a sucker when you have a real specific reason for it. It's pulling down a stake, blocking airflow at the base, or genuinely threatening to snap the plant's support. If your only reason is that's what you're supposed to do, put the pruners down. Every unnecessary cut stresses the plant, reduces how much energy it can produce, and opens another entry point for disease. This next one catches a lot of people completely off guard because it's the flip side of what most gardeners worry about. Everybody stresses about planting too early. Almost nobody ever warns you about planting too late. Tomatoes stop pollinating when daytime temperatures routinely push past 90 degrees Fahrenheit and nights hold steady above 70. The pollen gets clumpy and sticky. The flowers can no longer do their job and they drop off the plant. No pollination, no fruit. If you live somewhere below roughly 38 degrees north latitude, think southeastern United States, the Gulf Coast, a lot of the southwest, your productive window is spring, before the heat locks in for real. And this is where so many gardeners get burned without ever understanding why. The standard advice is to wait a week or two past your last frost date before planting. In a mild summer climate, that's totally fine. But in a hot, humid region, that exact advice sends your plants into their flowering phase, right as the most brutal heat of the year rolls in. The flowers drop, you get almost nothing. And if it's your first season in a climate like that, you don't even realise what happened. You just think tomatoes are hard to grow. Run ahead of the heat instead. Start transplants indoors earlier. Get plants in the ground the moment frost risk is actually gone, not a few weeks after. Go for heat-tolerant varieties and pay real attention to the days to maturity number on the seed packet. Shorter is better in this situation. And get this into your head. In hotter latitudes, tomatoes grow and flower in spring. Summer is nothing more than the ripening window for fruit that was already set before the heat arrived. Once you understand that, you stop losing whole seasons to a completely preventable mistake. And this last one, pay close attention here because it goes against the single most repeated piece of tomato advice out there. And that advice, I'm telling you, is just flat out wrong. Tomatoes are not a full sun species. I know what your nursery tag said. I know what every beginner gardening guide says. And none of it matters. It's wrong. Tomatoes evolved as vines along the forest floors of South and Central America, growing through dappled filtered light underneath the canopy. They were never built for 6 to 8 hours of raw, unfiltered summer sun blasting them every single day. And when you put them through that kind of stress, their natural defences start to break down. Disease finds a foothold in the plant's structure. And here's the wild part. A plant under that kind of stress releases chemical signals that pests can actually detect. So once the plant is struggling, everything comes for it at once. It snowballs fast. Here's the fix, and I promise it's simpler than it sounds. Plant in full sun in the spring. That part is still right. When the UV index is lower, full sun gives the plant the energy to grow fast. Flower early and hit the first pollination window while temperatures are still ideal. Then, as the summer heat really ramps up, around June 1st in a lot of climates, though your exact timing will vary, put shade cloth up above the plants. 40% shade cloth is the right starting point for most of you. What you've done is give the tomato plant the dappled, filtered light it's actually built to handle. Spring sun for speed, summer shade for survival. And the results are genuinely not subtle. In a hot, humid climate, shade cloth can add 45 to 60 days to your harvest window. In drier climates, it can keep your plants nearly disease-free for the entire season. It is the single highest impact, lowest cost change most tomato gardeners have never tried. And once you see what it does to your plants, you will not grow tomatoes without it again.